but he didn't officially say. He's trying to be Paiseh of Shnei, basically. Okay, listen. But the main thing is that any changes that you see going on have nothing to do with it. That's the main thing. Anything else doesn't matter anymore.
What about border crossing? Are they?
What they change by border crossings is if you come with children and your children aren't vaccinated, as you are, they do not have to quarantine. A and B is if you come from the U.S., you don't need a PCR test anymore. You just need a rapid test, an antigen test.
Into the U.S.
No, into Canada. When you're coming back into Canada, even if your children aren't vaccinated, if they're traveling with you, they don't have to quarantine.
Yeah, but what do you? Yeah, but you have to.
You don't have to. You don't need a PCR test to come back into Canada anymore. An antigen test is enough. So those are the two changes. It's still a headache, yeah.
PDFs that we have are all PCRs.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. We're gonna have to change the nusach of our PDF tests.
Yeah.
I get a new nusach. The main thing is that there's some testing required because Danny has to pay for his machines. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. So yesterday we had a shaila of how to read a pasuk, the pasuk that we're discussing before Matan Torah, oilos and shlomims that were brought. And the question was, you have an esnachta after the oilos, and therefore the end of the pasuk that discusses that the shlomims were purim does not apply to the oilos, and maybe the oilos were other animals, or where the oilos and the shlomims both purim. The way we have our truck, where there's an esnachta after the oilos, it would indicate that they were kvasim. Zok to Gemara, Tanan Hasan. We're at the very bottom line, the very last line of Daf Vav Amud Beis. Tanan Hasan. We say this every day, and now we're going to drill down a little bit into understanding what it is. Eilu devarim she'ein lahom shir. The following things do not have a shir. Hapeya. Peya has no shir. So Rashi explains what it means it has no shir. Hapeya, Rashi says, lo nitna by Torah shir, lo nasna by Torah shir. The Torah didn't give a shir to how much peya. Va'af al pi she'ein lepeya shir, even though the Torah didn't say how much peya you have to give. Nasnu by chachamim shir achas mishishim. So the chachamim gave a shir lemata, not lemaila. You can give as much as you want, but you shouldn't give less than 1/60th of your field to peya. So peya is the halacha that when you're harvesting your field, you have to leave over one edge, one side you have to leave over. How much does that side be? You could leave over 1 foot from the end of the field. You could leave over 100 feet from the end of the field. A side could be a lot. So the Chacham say it should be at least 1/60th of your field.
Well, I had 60 acres, not a very big field. Over 1 acre.
But he got 59 acres. He got 59 acres, right? Vabikurim. It says, "V'lakachta mereishis kol priha dama le'nemer kama." It says you're supposed to take from your first fruits and bring it up to the Beis Hamikdash. How much is that? It doesn't say.
What happens if he didn't get 59 acres? What happens if he had to buy and risk and finally leverage and everything until he finally got his 59 acres?
What does that mean? He doesn't own the land.
When you said he got, it's like he got it like Chalukah, like Yeshua gave him 59 acres. That was very easy for him to give 1 acre. But when Yitaka had to work and butcher and all that type of stuff, then it's hard for him to give an acre. It's more than Meiser.
It's more than Meiser, but it's really less than Meiser. And the reason why it's less than Meiser is Meiser, you had to bring it to its current stage. You have to do all the labor on that fruit. You have to cut it and thresh it and winnow it, right? And then you give. Here, you just leave it in the field. So you saved all your labor. Yes, it doesn't cost as much.
1 acre isn't even enough to put in the pool.
If you want
to make your argument, your argument that we've got so little.
Listen, I didn't even get past the first line. I'm being ripped apart already. You got to finish the thing. For Harayon. And Harayon, we don't know what this means. Lakaman Mafarish. the question that we're going to have is, does it mean merely appearing to the Beis Hamikdash by Re'iyah, or does it mean bringing the karbanos? But we'll get there in a minute. Well, Gemilas Chasadim, there's no limit to Gemilas Chasadim. Zok Toisvis, Avada, there's a limit to Gemilas Chasadim. Because the halacha is al yavavas, Yosy Chaimish. One is not allowed to give away more than 20% of their asset to tzedakah. So Toshis brings down that the Yerushalmi explains that this is talking about begufon, doing somebody a personal favor. There's no limit to the personal favors that one could do. However, when it comes to giving your money away, you're not supposed to give more than 20%. I should no, but I'll tell you a story, and I don't know if it's a true story, but I believe good stories don't have to be true. And I heard over that the Nasi of David Hofstadter went to speak to Reb Steinman when Reb Steinman was still alive, of course, and he said that the dirshu, that's right. I want to be clear, right? That dirshu is a very, very big expense, and he wants to know if he can give up Torah schools for Israel, which is a chedim, which he was supporting as well. And Rav Sham says, no, you have to do both. So he said, but it says, Al Yivaz's Yosher Mechaimish, and it's costing me more than 20% of my income to be able to keep these mosques going. So Rabbi Yashua said, this rule that you're not allowed to give more than 20% is someone who's wealthy, a normal wealth. But if someone's uber wealthy, that rule of giving away more than 20% does not apply to you. So then the raid was, the Nasi told him, yeah, but I don't even think, I'm sorry? Reb Steinman. So then I told him, I don't even know if I'm retaining 20% of my earnings because of the costs.
Getting poor and poor.
So Rabbi Yashua says, no, I'm sorry, Reb Steinman says, Afal Piki. And that's why he's still doing both. He's still doing both.
Maybe he's still doing both because he became richer.
Maybe that's how it works. Okay, so that's the story. I don't know if it's true. Zok to Gemara Vayter. Toshis also speaks out that there's many other mitzvahs that there's no shear to, such as Efer Soita. You could put as much earth into the water of the Soita, or Efer Paraduma, or Roik Yavama, the Yavama who could spit by the Chalitza. There's no limit to that either. So Toshis says we're only speaking about things that if you add to them, there'll be a more mitzvah. But there's no mitzvah involved in using more earth. So it's only things that if you add to it, there's more mitzvah involved. Why doesn't it say kibbut aveim? The more kibbut aveim, the better. The Torah is because sometimes you're not supposed to kibbut aveim. Like if your parents tell you to do something that's connected to Torah. Okay, so let's see the Gemara about it. And Talmud Torah, there's no shear to Talmud Torah. You can learn as much as you want. Like we say in Kavaguda, learning never ends, but cleanup period starts now. Rabbi Yochanan said, we assumed what's pshat in ra'ayah in ein lo shir. It means lamaila. There's no limit to how much you could spend on your oilas re'iyah. Abel yesh lo shir lamata, but there is a minimum shir. Until Rabbi Oishia Berebi came, the limit and he taught us hara'ayah in ein lo shir loy lamaila v'loy lamata. Even though there's no shir, how much you have to spend on your oilas riyah. Aval Amru Chachamim, the Bach changes it to Amru Chachamim, Hariyah Ma Kesef, the Chagiga Shtei Kesef, which is the Shita of Beis Hillel. So it's important to note that there's a Shaila in the Achronim, these are minimum shiurim. Hariyah Ma Kesef, Chagiga Shtei Kesef, right? But you're allowed to give more. The Shaila is, must you maintain the same ratio? Let's say I wanted to do an oilish riyah for 5 more. Does that mean the chagiga now has to be 10 more or not? So there is a shaila about it. So Zok Gemara, my harayim. What is this ra'ayin that we're talking about? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, it's riyas panim ba'azara. Resh Lakish Amar, it's riyas panim b'karb. Rabbi Yochanan says we're talking about riyas panim ba'azara. That's where there's ein lam shir. Resh Lakish says it's riyas panim b'karb. Now this is not a simple statement. It leads us to a huge machalik. So let's see what Rashi says. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, it means re'iyas panim ba'azara. That's where the Rashi says ein lam shir. In other words, kama pamim shu chafetz, as many times as you want to come to the Azara, ba umara atzma be'azara. You're allowed to come to the Azara. And the ein tzarech lahavi carbon b'chol riyah v'riyah. You can come up to the Azara every day, Yom Tov, 3 times a day. You can go to the kosher. You don't have to bring a carbon each time. It's enough that the very first time you come, you bring your carbon, and that's it. So the ein lam shir of our brayso is not speaking about the carbon is ein lam shir. It's speaking about the riyah. You're allowed to come as many times as you want without bringing a carbon. And Reish Lakish said, it's riyas panim the carbon. There's ein lam shir. V'tzarech lahavi carbon al kol pam upam. Every time you want to come up to the kosher, you have to bring a carbon with you. Which is the way it is now, because anytime you go to the kosher, you have all the mishalachim pouncing on you. So every time you go to the kosher, you bring a carbon. Come on, right? So what Rishak is saying is every time you're coming on Yom Tov, I don't think it means all year long, but whenever you come by Yom Tov, you come up, you have to bring a carbon. The amount of carbonos. Right. You can bring as many carbonos as you want. It's not about the size of the carbon, it's talking about how many carbonos you bring. Now, Toisus takes it a step further. So let's see Toisus. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Re'iyas Panim Ba'azara. The Chivan, the icy carbon, Chad the Zimna, the Vav, I believe, changed it to carbon. Does someone have a Bach? I can't find the Bach on my page. It's different. I believe the Bach says carbon. Yeah, carbon. Chivan the icy carbon.
That seems to make sense. The Chivan the icy carbon Berea.
Yeah, let's just finish Toisus. We just got to the first line. The Chivan the icy carbon Berea, Chad Zimna, one time, Mifter Bekach im Yirtza, that's enough. Oy Yavi Kamoisha Yirtza, or he can bring more if he wants. Alva Re'iyas Panim Bekarbon, that Yesh Lashir, that's only one. The Svir Lei, Rabbi Yochanan, Ma Kesef, Ushtei Kesef, Dairaisa. So Toisus now takes it one step further. Since we're saying that there's a She'ir to Re'iyas Panim Bekarbon, so then that makes it that it's Dairaisa as well. Because if there's a shear, so that means there's a shear for it, it's got to be Dairaisa. Otherwise, there's a shear for it. V'hachi isha b'Yerushalmi de Meseches Peya, Masnisin b'Re'iyah. We see the Zayin again in the Bach. Masnisin b'Re'iyas Panim, right? Aval b'Re'iyas Carbon, Yesh lo shear. Rabbi Yochanan ma kasef, shtei kasef Dairaisa. So Toisus is telling us in the Yerushalmi that it's not just a machlokes. If you have to bring a carbon each time you go, that's not the only machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish. Rabbi Yochanan will hold that you only have to bring the carbon once, holds that the shear is the eraisa. The oid amar b'mechelton Rabbi Yochanan kedaytei the amar kol asher yurim halacha l'moshem Sinai v'amar ma kesef v'shtei kesef d'eraisa. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the ma kesef and the shtei kesef d'eraisa is not rabbanon. Where Shlakish the mukila b'riyas panim and Shlakish who learned that the Mishnah is speaking about Riyas Panim, the carbon sphere lay, can be sure the Amar Mokesef, Shtei Kesef D'Rabbanan, like our Gemara says. Because that's what I wanted to bring out, because that's a very important auxiliary machlokes that Tosfos says is totally in our shiloh that we have over here. I'm sorry, Chachi, I knocked you off before.
That's so important. I mean, first of all, Mokesef is a term that's not found in the Chumash, right? Meaning of law. So I guess somehow even though the word is not
the value is.
Yeah. We have to call it the value. But back before in the very beginning, we said the Kiva the icy and the Bach puts in by the Vav, the Bach puts in a word.
Carbon.
And so that seems to flow. But what was bothering the Bach when it said Aval Chachomim Oimrim and you have to switch it to Aval Omru Chachom? Back in the Gemara, think by the Aleph.
Because that's the way it normally is mentioned in prices. Yeah. Even though there's no shear, the Chacham said that there is a shear. Yeah. When there's a machlokes quoted the Chachamim, but it's not a machlokes, it's just talking about the kind that was made. I think it usually says Amru Chacham. So and like Rashi explains, you're allowed to come as many times as you want, but you only have to bring a carbon once. The Shlokas have a respond the carbon, you got to bring a carbon each time. So exactly what are the details of the machlokes? The Ikar Regal, by the regal itself, loy pligi the re'iyas panim the carbon. Everybody agrees that when you're coming up on Yom Tov to do a Re'iyas Panim, everybody agrees you have to bring a carbon. And Rashi says very clearly, the Yom Tov Rishon. The first appearance you make in the Beis Hamikdash, you have to be accompanied with a carbon. Keep ligi. Where's the machlokes for Bechel and Shlokish? B'shar Yomai Sheregel on the rest of the days of Yom Tov. So you see clearly, not on Yom Tov. I think everybody agrees you don't bring a carbon when you go. This is just the shaila of the days of Yom Tov. Keep ligi b'shar Yomai Sheregel. Faleicha the asa the icy kul amaloi pligi the mekablin. If a person brought a carbon with him on every single day as he comes up to the Azara, everybody gives you accepted. Even Rabbi Yechon who says you're not mechuyev to bring a carbon every day, if you want to bring a carbon, you're allowed to, and they accept it. Keep ligi, the whole machlokes between Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish is the asa v'loy isi. If you came on the second day of Yom Tov, third day, fourth day, all of the days after the first day, and you came without a carbon. Rabbi Yechon Sabar Re'iyas Panim Ba'Azara, the Einlam share is referring to coming up to the Azara. The Chalemas to Asi, anytime he wants to come, Lloyd Tzarech Losui, he doesn't have to bring with him a carbon. Mishlakish Jamarias Panim Becarbon, the Chalemas to Asi, Tzarech Losui, he has to bring a carbon. So this is the Havamin in the Gemara, what the Machlokes is. The Machlokes is on the rest of the days of Yom Tov, are you allowed to come up without a carbon or not? So the Rishonim ask a very, very good kasha. The Rishonim ask, there's zikr a mitzvah to come up to the Azara, right? So Rish Lakish is saying that you're not supposed to come unless you bring a carbon with you, right? The Gemara says, keep pligi, the also v'loyaisi. And Rish Lakish holds, Rias part of a carbon, the Cholim doesn't charach l'suya. So the question is, if a guy doesn't have a carbon, why don't you say asay like Chaloisha said? If the v'loyari pani reikam means you have to bring a carbon, but it says shalosh pam b'shadi yirak kosuchocha, why don't you say asay like Chaloisha said? And even without a carbon, you should go up. So that's what somebody Mefarshim asked. So the answer simply, where do you say asay like Chaloisha said? If there's two independent halachas, there's the asay that says one must give his child a bris. There's a loisha that says one may not cut off a beheres. And now they conflict. So then I say the chalosha. But here the Torah is telling you the way you're supposed to come up is with bringing a carbon. That's not asay the chalosha. That's the asay. That's the loisha defining the asay. So there you would not say the asay the chalosha. Because let's see the Gemara right. So Rish Lakish is going to ask three kashas on Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan is going to deflect the kasha the same way each time.
I think that was a kasha from the Rishonim, that we shouldn't be making a mistake. I don't think that bothered. I don't think that ever bothered any other Rishonim.
It was just to clarify. Okay, very good. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal once told me, and every other member of our class, when he spoke to us by Shmuel Ermes Bar Mitzvah, that the whole shot in a shtickle Torah is you have a kasha, and from the kasha you gain an insight into how things work. So that's the purpose of a kasha. Through a kasha, you get clarity in how things work. That's the definition of a chiddush. That's it.
And the Yaman told me, don't be such a big shot when you ask places is kasha,
right?
Because places is only telling you what you're supposed to ask.
Uh-huh.
When you called that kasha that you just said, you called it a good kasha. I perked my ears back. What is Yosy Simon Chagiga a good kasha? And then I hear this answer that somehow I saw it coming, right? So that's why
I hear. Okay, gewaltig. So Rish Lakish is now going to ask the first of a series of three kashas on Rabbi Yochanan. It looks like Rabbi Yochanan is getting attacked, but you're soon to see we're going to end up slugging up Rish Lakish. So Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. It says v'lo yiro panai reikam. So it says v'lo yiro panai reikam, which is mashma. Every time you come up, you have to bring the carbon. So how are you, Rabbi Yochanan, going to explain that you can come up as many times as you want and you don't have to bring up a carbon? Amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan answered, be'ikar regel. That pasuk is referring to the first day of Yom Tov, as Rashi touches earlier. Be'ikar regel means the Yom Tov Rishon. So that's how Rabbi Yochanan deflects the first kasha. Esvei. So now the Gemara asks another kasha. Rish Lakish asks another kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. It says v'lo yirah pani reikim, and the Brisa says bizvachim, and Rashi says tzarich lavi carbon behema hazvuchin b'sakin v'lo oilas ha'oiv shinum lekas. So it has to be a zevach. It has to be a behema. It can't be an oif. You're saying it has to be an animal. The Brisa says maybe it's only an oif, umenachis or a mincha. But the svar is it has to be a behema because nemer chagiga lahedit and nemer re'iyah legvay. Ma chagiga amur lahedit zvachim. Just like the chagiga that's mentioned by a hedjit is referring to zvachim, because Rashi tells us how do we know the chagiga is specifically referring to behemoths? Because it says shal behema yichsiv lo yolin chelev chagi ad boiker. So it talks about the chelev of this chagiga, and therefore Rashi tells us, "But midi the isla chelev hakakriv legvoya kamar." What type of carbon should you bring? A carbon that has chelev, and a bird or a mincha does not have chelev. So afreia amur legvoya. So too the carbon that's going legvoya, the oila zvachim will be behemoths. Umahein zvachim. What are these zvachim? Oilos. They're carbonis of oila. Are you telling me that they're carbon oilos? Maybe they're shlom. Maybe all the carbonos are shlom, and you're not bringing oilos. Vidinu, but no, the svar is our oilos because nemer chagiga lahedit, the nemer re'iyah legavoya. It says about a chagiga lahedit in the pasuk, and it says re'iyah legavoya. And we dash it ma chagiga amur lahedit b'royu loy, just like the chagiga that's for the hedit, it's b'royu loy. Af re'iyah hamur legavoya b'royu loy. When it's a carbon that's appropriate for it, so therefore it has to be an oila because the oila is royal loy, it's right to Shemayim. The chain bedin, and there's another svara to support that it should be an oila. There should be a carbon oila brought for the chelak Hashem, is because and you might say, why is a shlomim not royal loy? A shlomim also is given the gavaya partially. The teretz is by a shlomim only the emurin are going to the gavaya, the chaylev, but the meat, the geshmak apart, the rib steaks, that's going to the person. So royal means the meat has to go up to Shemayim, the meat has to go on the mizbeach, and therefore we know that it's an oila and there's a shlomim of a behemoth.
Yosy, so the Gemara is establishing that it's got to be a behemoth. In many personal carbonas, there are. It depends on how wealthy or poor you are. You can bring
like the oil of a
right. So here the Gemara doesn't make a distinction if you can afford it or you can't afford it, or that's a little unusual. So everybody has to no matter how poor they are, they have to be oila rega, and they've got to bring a behemoth.
Correct. It's interesting. There's actually a shaila in the Rishonim. What if someone cannot afford two behemoths? He can only afford one. Should he bring the chagiga or should he bring the oilas re'iyah? And there are those who want to learn that we have a machlokes b'sham and b'sil. What you have to give more money for. So that machlokes would also include if you only had enough for one, what would you do? According to Bishamai, the oilas re'iyah is more important, so it would be the oilah. I don't know what you would eat the rest of Yom Tov. And according to Beisil, you would bring the chagiga, not the oilas re'iyah.
At least in the korban,
it doesn't seem that there's an allowance made for someone who can't afford it.
And the korban pesach, at least you could be a shittif and the korban, but so that's a little unusual here.
It is different. There's no sliding scale.
Right.
Unless a more kesef is such a small amount of money, that's like the bare minimum, and people who are wealthier will buy more, which we'll see does happen.
Possibly, yeah.
But
okay.
Pesach, I don't know if you can have a shidduch. Maybe you could, yeah. I don't know.
But there are no allowances for eifus and minchas. If
you could bring those, but you're not mekayim the mitzvah of chagiga,
which is very interesting.
Even though we use an egg.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So once again, this proves that you have to make a carbon each time. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan answers, Be'ikar Regel. Now, the Rishonim and Achronim Mutzizich, what new kasha is asked on this brisa that we didn't know already? The same way Rabbi Yochanan already deflected to V'lo Yeroi Panei Rekam in the first kasha, where Rabbi Yochanan deflected it by saying Be'ikar Regel, we know the same information over here as well. So why did the Gemara ask this kasha? Why didn't the Gemara assume right off the bat that Rabbi Yochanan can also say that this is only referring to the first day? Okay. Esrei Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. No. Esrei, again, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan, I believe the Bach says. It's Esrei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Let me look at the base. Yes. Esrei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan.
It's simple to say talking about one day. Ikarego means talking about the first day.
Right.
So you're not going to answer that.
No, I hear that, but once the Gemara answered that to the first kasha, why is the second kasha any different? But there are different as why it's different. I just don't remember off the top of my head what those answers are. I'm sorry. Shalosh Rigolim Bashana, 3 times a year. Nitztavu Yisrael Lalois Berega. Bechagamatzos, Ubechaga Shavuos, Ubechaga Sukkos. The Ein Nirin Chatzoin, you cannot be Nirin Chatzoin. Rashi says Mefarish Lakamon. The Gemara will explain later what this means. Mishum Shenemar Kol Zechorcha. The Ein Nirin Rekanin, and you cannot come empty-handed. That we know what it means. You need to bring a carbon. Mishum Shenemar V'lo Yiro Panei Reika. So once again, you see there's a chiyuv to bring a carbon. The Gemara, the same territory as before. Maybe that's only referring to the first day of Yom.
All of you have to do all one
I'm not sure. I'm not understanding what you're saying. Shalosh Palim Sheyirah Kol Zechorcha.
All of you only have to bring one carbon.
Why would you learn that way? Each person has a chiyuv. I hear. So maybe you could combine. Okay. So let's see the Gemara back. So Rabbi Yochanan was able to withstand the 3 kashas that Reish Lakish asked on him, and now Rabbi Yochanan comes back and asks the kasha on Reish Lakish. Eisei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So let's see what it says in the Gimel. I think it says Yireh Yeroya. Right? It says Yireh Yeroya. That was the drasha that we learned the same way. We are seen by the Rebbeinu Shloim. That's how we have to see the Rebbeinu Shloim, right? That's how we learned that a person has to be able to see. That's how we learned a person has to be able to with both eyes. Now we have a different drasha. Ma'ani bechinam, af atem bechinam. The same way. I'm not paying anything to see you, so too you don't have to pay to see me. This is a free encounter. There's no charge for this visit. So Ella, so you have a clear raya that you're allowed to come to see the Rebbeinu Shloim. You're allowed to be a Rav. This is speaking about on Yom Tov, and you don't have to bring a carbon. So this slugs up what we said. We said before that the Machlok Yisrael Rechan and Reish Lakish is if every single time you come up to the base of Mikdash during Yom Tov you have to bring something. Here you have a pasuk that says Bechina.
In what way is that going to being of Bechina? He's got to give us all kinds of brachos. What do you mean Bechina? In what way?
Well, he's not bringing a carbon. He's not doing anything. So you're saying the Ma'aseh the Rebbeinu gives us a lot of bracha, but that's not a condition of us coming to see him. The Rebbeinu does that regardless. Even if we do affairs, the Rebbeinu does that. Ella, kol heichad also. So we have to change our explanation of the Machlokes because everybody agrees that if you come any day of Yom Tov, you don't have to bring a carbon with you. But what is the Machlokes of Rechan and Reish Lakish? Also, I see any day where you came and you didn't bring a carbon with you. Everybody else, you can come as much as you want. You can come to the base of Mikdash, and you don't have to bring a carbon. Only the first day. Keep pligi the asav icy. The whole machlokes is if you came and you brought a carbon with you on the subsequent days, the later days of Yom Tov, do you accept the carbon from him? On the Amar Re'iyas Panim Ba'Zara, so he learns Re'iyas Panim Hu De'ein Lashir. The only thing that there's no shear to, you can do as much as you want. That's Re'iyas Panim Ba'Zara. Halakarbon Yesh Lashir. And therefore, if you want to bring another Chagiga, you can bring Shalom Simcha. But if you want to bring another chagiga, we will not take it from you. The shloka shomer re'is panim bekarban, that doesn't have a shear. Afilu carbon nami ain't lo shear. Now this changes the whole machlokes around. The machlokes is, are you allowed to bring more than one chagiga? Eisher fake the Gemara. Hukar raglecha mi beis reyecha. I don't have the whole pasuk quoted here because I have an old Gemara. Can someone read the whole pasuk? It's a very important pasuk. So hukar raglecha mi beis reyecha, right? Pen yispecha. What the pasuk shot is, don't freeload on your friend too much because he's giving you for free, because he might get overdosed on you and then want to reject you. Right? That's the lush. That's what the pasuk is saying. So so you see that you're not supposed to bring too many karbanis. So you see a kash on your shlokish who holds you can bring as many karbanis as you want. And for the Gemara, you cannot bring as many chatois and shamas as you want. And Rashi says, don't do multiple averos. Don't say, I want to bring a lot of carbon copies. So let me go do averos. A person shouldn't do that. A person should refrain from doing that. The Reb Levi Rami, he asked the kasha, meaning don't overdose, don't bring too many karbanos. And there we learn you should bring as many karbanos as you want. Which you should keep to a minimum. Where you're allowed to bring as much as you want. Okay. Zog to Gemara weiter. Tanya namihachi. Huka raglechem beis vayecha bechatois vashamois akasim medaber. Ata oimer bechatois vashamois oy oine ella ba'oilos shlomim. Maybe you should even minimize the oilos and shlomim that you bring. Kishu oimer avoy beisecha ba'oilos ashalem lechanadarai. You see, it's good to bring a lot of nadarim and nadavas. Hari oilos shlomim amar. Amani mekayim huka raglechem beis vayecha. Where am I saying you shouldn't bring too much? It's b'chatois v'shamois akasim medaber. The beis reyecha is referring here to beis hakadosh baruch hu, beis hafcha hakadosh baruch hu. Rashi says, Shekari Yisrael Reim. The Rebbe Shem refers to Klal Yisrael as his friends. Shenemer lamam achai v'rayah. Beautiful. Zok the Gemara back. Ve'ein nir chatzoy. So we didn't explain earlier what that means. Now the Gemara is going to explain. So Rabbi Yosef lemeimar. What does it mean? Ve'ein nir chatzoy. It's the man the islay asar banim. If somebody has 10 sons, and he doesn't want to take all 10 sons up to the base of Mikdash, but he brought them all to the other regal, so it takes turns. On the first day of Yom Tov, he'll bring 5 sons, and you can will come with me, will come with Tati to shul tomorrow. And Rashi speaks out, the lavachi, if you don't learn that pshat, you can't learn pshat is that maybe he only takes 5 lechatchila with him, because the lavachi my ein chatzayin the yolef mi b'chol zechorcha. We learned it out of Kol Zechorcha. Isha lo yiyu chatz in island. If what the chiddush of Einir Chatzai means that the bride is telling you you're not allowed to bring only half, period, not the other half. That you know from Zechorcha nafka, because when it says Zechorcha have to be oil regel to recall out Zechorcha. So we already know everybody has to show their face on Yom. Everybody. Now the question is, do they all have to be the same day? So we want to learn from Kol Zechorcha that you have to bring all 10 kids up the first day.
That Rashi's Loshen is addressing the Gemara's wording. What do you mean, Sovar of Yosef Lamemer? Why didn't you just say Omer of Yosef? What's the idea of Sovar of Yosef Lamemer? Like you thought to say, like this makes sense. And now Rashi is saying,
because we're going to see in a second, the Gemara going to ask the kasha on it.
Right, but Rashi is also using the Sovar because he's saying the Ilav Hochi. Also in that way.
So both ways. It can't mean it cannot mean Rabbi Yossi is like it cannot mean that you don't have to bring up all your kids. It must mean you don't have to bring up all your kids at once.
Right, and that's what Rashi is saying.
Right. And it cannot. So Amar Abai. So now we're at the top of our base. Amar Abai. Pshita. It's possible you have to bring all 10 up the first day. You know why? Ha'iminayu mashif lehu poishim. Which 5 are you going to make poishim? The ha'iminayu mashif lehu zerizin. So you see from the Gemara that the opposite of a zoriz is a poisheya. Someone who doesn't want to do the mitzvah as soon as possible, the Gemara calls a poisheya. Now I have an older Gemara. In the newer Gemaras, there's a little dot, there's a little letter by poishim, and at the tziyonim it brings down a different word. What's the other word used? Do you have by you? Maybe do you have by you? No, you also poishim. So I had the Gemara yesterday, and it had to use a different word instead of poishim. But you see that the word that the opposite of a zar is a pesheya. Ella kralamayasa. So avada, you have to bring all 10 kids up the same day. So what are we doing for the pasuk? Lichadachayim. The Tanya Chayim Oimrim. We learned this already. Hamakamitz v'amitzaref nechoishes. Makamitz is a dog dung gatherer, or a mitzaref nechoishes, someone who forges copper in the copper mines, Rashi told us. Babursi and tanners, they're all very smelly, and they generally will not be let on the public transportation. Paturim and Riyah, they're put from Riyah, Shenemar Kol Zechorcha. The only type of people who are invited to come be other regel are Mishiyacha Lalish in Kol Zechorcha, if they could travel in public transportation with other people. Yatsu Elu, She'en Yechoyim Lalish in Kol Zechorcha, because people are repulsed by their smell and will not travel. Zok the Gemara Vayter. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Oilois b'moyed, and at this point, the Havamini of the Gemara is that it means chalamoid. Oilos and chalamoid bois munachulim. You cannot bring an oilos re'iyah from ma'aser money that you have. You have to use chulin money. Why would it make a difference if it's chalamoid or not chalamoid? The Gemara is going to address that. But shlamim mina ma'aser, you're allowed to bring even if it's ma'aser. And Rashi told us, the Gemara is going to tell us it's referring to shalom is simple. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, the first day of Pesach, and again, why B'dafka the first day of Pesach? Why not the first day of Sukkot or the first day of Shavuos? But the Mishnah says Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, V'shami Armim Min HaChulin, you have to bring your karbanos from Chulin. V'sil Armim Min HaMaiser, you can even bring your karbanos of Chiyuv from Maiser. The Gemara is going to elaborate on what this is talking about. Yisrael, Yoichin Lechevasim, we need to have Shalmei Simcha, meaning you have to have a lot of meat. So where do you get your meat from? So the Yisraelim, they can be yoytze, their mitzvah of meat. When the darim and the daves of the Masha Behema, they might have made throughout the year the darim and the daves. They may have been makabel upon themselves to bring carbon shlomims, or they have Masha Behema. So now when they're being oil regel, they can bring all that with them, and that will be their supply of meat. So Kehanim, they're lucky; they can travel with hand baggage only. They don't need to schlep behemoths along. You know why? They get the meat of all the carbon chatois that the owners had to schlep up. Ubebechar, that the owner had to schlep up. Ubechaz of a shaykh. From every shlamim, they get the chaz of a shaykh. So they don't have to schlep, they just get ready-made food. But you cannot be yoytze the mitzvah of simcha with birds or with menachas. So frag the Gemara right away. It says oilas b'moyed bois menachulin. So ela oilas b'moyed who the bois menachulin habayamtim min ha'maiser. If you bring an oilah on Yom Tov, you're telling me you're allowed to use ma'aser money for that? Am I? Why would that be allowed? There's a chiyuv to bring an oilus re'iyah. And anytime you have something that's a mandatory chiyuv, that has to be brought from your own money. You can't use ma'aser money to pay something that you have a chiyuv to bring. So how could you explain why on Yom Tov you're allowed to use money that's ma'aser? You might want to tell me that avada even on Yom Tov you have to bring it in the chulin. So why does the Mishnah say that you're bringing a carbon b'moyed? To teach you the oilas b'moyed ba'is b'Yom Tov einan ba'is. Maybe the Mishnah agav orcha kamash malon is mentioning on moyed because on Yom Tov you cannot bring the oilas re at all. The problem is we had a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai held you were not allowed to bring the oilas re on Yom Tov. But Beis Hillel held you were allowed to bring the oilus on Yom Tov. So are you going to say that this Mishnah is following the Shita of Beis Shammai? Because our Mishnah is saying that you cannot bring an oilah on Yom Tov? Command ke Beis Shammai, that non Beis Shammai oimer mevin shlomim. You can bring shlomims on Yom Tov. The ain't tzomich naleim, you cannot do smicha because it's also it's midrabanan being mishamish with a behema. Avaloi oilish, but you're not allowed to bring a carbon oilah at all on Yom Tov. Beis Hillel mevin shlomim ve'oilish. You're allowed to bring both shlomim and oilish because the oilish are a chiyah for today. And you can do smicha. So are you going to argue that that's what our Mishnah is saying? That it agrees with Beis Shammai, that you're not allowed to bring a carbon oilish re'iyah on the first day of Yom Tov? So no. We need to add some information into the Mishnah. Oilish nedarim unedavois b'moyed bois b'Yom Tov einam bois. The regular oilah, not the oilah of the chiyuv re'iyah. If you made a neder nedava, which doesn't have to be brought on Yom Tov, there's no mitzvah that it should be brought on Yom Tov. Those karbanos you're not allowed to bring on Yom Tov. You can only bring them on Cholamoid. But for Eilis Re'iyah, the mitzvah of bringing the Eilis Re'iyah, which is specifically for Yom Tov, that is Ba Afilu B'Yom. That you can even bring on Yom Tov. Uchashihi Ba Einei Ba Ela Menachlu. So basically, the first line of the Mishnah that says Eilis B'Moyed, that's referring to regular Nedarim and Nedavis, could only be brought B'Moyed. And the second half of the first sentence, Bois Menachulin, is referring to Eilis Re'iyah that are brought on Yom Tov. They only allowed to be brought from Chulin. The Shalmei Simcha, and what about Shalmei Simcha? Those are just the extra meat that you have. Boyin Af Min HaMaiser, that you can use even Meiser. The Chagigas Yom Tov Harishon Shal Pesach, and the Chagiga that we bring on the first day of Pesach, and we're going to ask soon what's the difference if it's the first day of Pesach or if it's the first day of Sukkot, and we'll get to in a second. But the Chagiga of the first day of Pesach, Beishamei Omer Min HaChulin, Beishamei, that has to be purely from Chulin. V'Hillel Omer Min HaMaiser, even the carbon of Chiyuv, the Chagiga is a Chiyuv, it's not just Shalmei Simcha. Even the carbon of Chiyuv, Beis Hillel says you're allowed to bring it to Meiser. And the Gemara is going to ask, how could you bring it to Meiser? It's a carbon of Chiyuv. So the Gemara is going to explain that Beis Hillel holds that when it says Min HaMaiser, it doesn't mean it could be fully for Meiser, it could be partially for Meiser. Tani Nami Hachi, Oilos Nedarim Nedavos, B'Moyed Bois B'Yom Tov Ein Bois. If you Stamazoi made a neder and a dava to bring a carbon oila, such carbonas could not be brought on Yom Tov because they're not lachila and they're not special mitzvah to bring them on Yom Tov. So therefore, you can only bring them on Cholamoid. But Vailas Re'iyah, where there's a special mitzvah to bring it on Yom Tov, according to Beis Hillel, Ba Afilu B'Yom Tov, that you can be makrib even on Yom Tov. Uchashehi Ba, and when you do bring it, the mitzvah of Eilis Re'iyah, Einei Ba Ela Min HaChulin, the Eilis Re'iyah has to be purely from Chulin. The Shalmei Simcha, but the Shalmei Simcha, which is just the general vast amount of meats that we're supposed to have, Boyin Af Min HaMaiser, those you can use any supply of carbon that you have, like the Mishnah said, it could be Meiser, it could be the Darim and Davis or Shlomims, whatever you have, you can bring. The Chagigas Yom Tov Harishon Shal Pesach, and the Chagiga, which is a Chiyav to bring on the first day of any Yom Tov, V'Shami Yomer Min HaChulin, U'V'Sil Haimer Min HaMaiser. Break the Gemara, why did we pick Dafka Pesach? Maishna Chagigas Yom Tov Harishon Shal Pesach. Why didn't we say Chagiga Yom Tov Rishon even of Sukkot? Amar Ravashi, Hakamash Malon, the Chagigas Chamisha Asher in, Chagigas Arba Asher Loi. Every Yom Tov, on the first day of Yom Tov, which is the 15th day of Tishrei, or the 15th day of Nisan, you have to bring a carbon Chagiga. But by Pesach, there's an extra carbon Chagiga that you have to bring. And they brought a carbon Chagiga on Erev Yom Tov, which is the same day they brought the carbon Pesach. Why did they do that? Because since the carbon Pesach has to be Nechal ala Soiva, you had a meal first, and then the last little bit that you ate would be the carbon Pesach. So by definition, you had to have a meal first, you had to have a carbon first. So they used to bring a carbon Chagiga on the 14th day as well. So that's what's unique about Pesach. So Zok the Gemara, Maishna Chagigas Yom Tov Rishon Pesach, Amar Bashi Hakamash Malon, that Chagigas Chamisha Asher in, it chapped on Pesach to make the distinction between the Chagiga of the Chamisha Asher, that could be brought, that has to have some Chulin content in it, but Chagigas Arba Asher Loi, the Chagiga that you bring on the 14th day, just so you can eat the Korban Pesach Ala Soiva, that can be completely Meiser, that there is no restriction on. And we'll just learn the first line on the Chesed Aleph. You see clearly that the Chagiga that you bring on the 14th day, so that you can eat ala soiva, is not a chiv deraisa, and therefore you could bring it fully from Meiser. It doesn't have to be brought from Chulin. Let's just see the bottom Rashi on Zayin Amud Beis. Chagigas Yudalid Loi Kloimar Lahachi Nakat Pesach. The reason why our Mishnah chapped on the Chagiga of Pesach rather than Sukkot, the Visheyesh Erev Pesach Chagiga Acheres. On Erev Pesach there'd be another Chagiga. Kishahoysa Chaburis Pesach Meruba. If the people in the group for the Korban Pesach was many and there wasn't enough for everyone to eat ala soiva, Hoyumavin Ima Chagiga Kidei Sheyei Pesach Nechal ala soiva. Lashminim Asnisen. The Mishnah is telling us a chiddush. The Chagigas Yom Tov Atzmoi Hu De'enoi Ba Elam in Achul. The Chagiga that you bring on the day of Yom Tov, where there's a mitzvah that arises and you bring that carbon Chagiga, that has to be brought from Chulin. According to Bishami, it has to be pure Chulin. According to Beis Hillel, it has to have some content of Chulin that we'll see tomorrow. The chagiga that's brought on day 14 just to have extra meat, but in order to say there, that can be purely meiser. There's no rules about that because there's no chiyuv deraisa to bring such a carbon. That's just so that we can eat Allah. Look up at what?
Is that
Oh, very good kasha. Very good kasha. You're asking a beautiful kasha. Because of that, because Rashi directly addresses the kasha, let's see it inside.
what was the
It says
kasha?
over here, he asks, what's happens that the oila cannot be brought from Meiser, but the shlom, the chagiga could be brought partially from Meiser, according to Beis. So let's have a look. Now, I just want to tell you that the Gemara is going to explain that the chagiga can be brought from Meiser means not fully from Meiser, but it's a lot of Meiser content. So let's see Rashi, Uchashiba, Eineba, Element Achulin, which is halfway down in the wide lines of Rashi. And Rashi says, Vahacha, Leimatzi la fluge ulamemer toifel meiser imoyim. You cannot say by the oila that you should mix it with meiser, like we're saying by the chagiga by the shlomim. The chi'ishteri tfeila bechagiga hu the ishteri. That we're going to learn on Chesam Aleph that you allow to mix in some meiser, that's only by the chagiga. Who the history? Let me just chop the aleph. Kidetanya lakaman, like we're going to learn on number aleph. Minayin shemratza la'arif. So Zok Rashi gabi shlomim yesh adam sheyesh lo ochlem merubin unuchasim moatim. By a shlomim, a person might not be wealthy, but he has a lot of family that he has to feed. He simply can't afford to bring so many karbanis from chulin. He needs to use some of his meiser. Abel oila lama taifelas. Why would you need to add to it? You could use the minimum amount. Yavi b'ma kesa. Bring the bare minimum. So by a shlomim, where I need more than the minimum, I need to feed my family. So I have a minimum of chulin, and the rest will be meiser. By the oila, just use the minimum. So therefore, there's no need to mix in meiser. There's no benefit. Okay. So it's mamish your kasha. It's exactly your kasha that Rashi asked. I think I should learn inside. I'm happy you asked the kasha, because then we'll be able to learn the Rashi inside. Okay, shkoyach.
I guess on the women that you have to buy them clothes and jewelry, could you do that?